It's 6 p.m. on a Tuesday here in Korea. Welcome to our newscast. I'm Daniel Che. Let's begin with the headlines. Seoul announces its own unilateral measures to punish Pyongyang. It includes blacklisting more names, strengthening maritime sanctions, and blocking the flow of hard cash and commodities. This comes as UN resolutions set in denying 4 North Korean cargo ships entry. China's foreign minister emphasizes that Beijing cannot help Pyongyang until it gives up its nuclear ambitions. Wang Yi even warms up to the idea of holding 5-party denuclearization talks excluding North Korea. Following an emergency meeting on cyber terrorism, Seoul's top spy agency unveils there have been numerous hacking attempts by Pyongyang targeting key South Korean officials. South Korea announced a new set of unilateral sanctions on North Korea to complement the sanctions adopted by the United Nations last week and separate penalties announced by the U.S. and Japan. We now connect live to our Unification Ministry correspondent Connie Kim for details on the list of measures Seoul has decided on. Connie, what can you tell us?
Well, Daniel, South Korea's sanctions on North Korea focus on tightening existing financial and maritime sanctions against the regime. The announcement was made at 3 p.m. on Tuesday, about 3 hours ago from the Prime Minister's office. And the hope is that the new set of measures will discourage Pyongyang from developing its nuclear weapons program.
The government's measures on North Korea, along with the UN Security Council resolution, aim to raise awareness of individuals and organizations in third countries and keep them from contributing to the regime's nuclear weapons programs. We hope the measures will greatly contribute to blocking commodities related to North Korea from being smuggled into South Korea.
Now, the new sanctions can be summarized in 4 points. First, South Korea is blacklisting 40 individuals and 30 organizations. The individuals on the list include people who have contributed to North Korea's nuclear weapons development and those who have been involved in its weapons trade. Second, South Korea will ban all ships that stopped at North Korean ports within 180 days from making port entry in the south. Now, this comes on top of maritime sanctions imposed by Japan that also ban North Korean ships. Third, South Korea will strengthen its monitoring of exports and imports related to North Korea in order to block all North Korean products from coming into the country through another nation. To do this, Seoul will come up with a so-called watch list of products, though that hasn't been released yet. Last but not least, South Korea will urge South Koreans and Koreans living overseas to refrain from visiting private North Korean facilities, such as North Korean restaurants that rake in a substantial amount of cash for the regime.
Well, Connie, what about the Najin Hasan Logistics Project? The railway project was a pivotal part of President Park Geun-hye's Eurasia initiative.
Well, Daniel, unfortunately, the Najin Hasan Logistics Project, a symbol of trilateral cooperation between the two Koreas and Russia, will be suspended as South Korea will ban all vessels that have previously docked in North Korea. Now, Seoul had notified Russia on Monday that it'll withdraw from the project as it can neither allow the private consortiums involved to visit the north nor allow ships from North Korea to make port calls in the south. Now, with all of these measures, North Korea will no longer have revenue coming from railway and port fees. South Korea did say, however, it did review a resumption of the project if and when there is progress in North Korea's denuclearization. But as you can imagine, Russia won't be happy with Seoul pulling out of the project, so observers are keeping an eye on what the response from Moscow will be. Well, that's all I have for now, Daniel, but I'll have more updates in our later newscast. This has been Connie Kim reporting live from the Central Government Complex in Seoul.
All right, thank you for that, Connie. It has emerged that 4 North Korean cargo ships were blocked from entering Chinese and Russian ports over the weekend under the conditions of the recently adopted UN resolution against the regime. Kwon So-hwa fills us in on how the first sanctions are beginning to bite.
Among South Korea's additional independent sanctions on North Korea, there has been great emphasis on the maritime sanctions, which the government has been considering for quite some time. And their importance is also reflected by the swift actions taken by several countries to implement the UN Security Council's measures regarding North Korean ships. 4 North Korean cargo ships were blocked from Chinese and Russian ports over the weekend under the conditions of the recently adopted UN Security Council resolution. According to Seoul-based news agency YTN Tuesday, 3 of 31 North Korean ships tied to a Pyongyang-based shipping company that are on the UN's blacklist tried to enter Chinese ports on Friday and Saturday. Another blacklisted North Korean vessel was refused entry into Russia on Sunday. Seoul's foreign ministry was said to have known about the scheduled port calls and requested that the two countries refuse the ship's entry. According to an official, the UN Sanctions Committee will be responsible for monitoring ship names as they have been changed frequently in the past. Experts say preventing the ships from getting maritime insurance by sanctioning insurance firms would be another way to hinder the North's illicit activities. Meanwhile, Mexico is also on standby to respond to the resolution. The North Korean vessel Mudubong has been held at a Mexican port for almost 2 years. Mexico's foreign ministry says it is awaiting guidance from the UN and will not take independent actions such as confiscating the ship until then. The Philippines was the first country to impound a North Korean cargo ship just days after the unprecedented sanctions on North Korea were passed. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
In line with the stern responses that have emerged from the international community against North Korea's 4th nuclear test and latest rocket launch, one of the regime's few remaining allies makes clear that it too will not condone such provocations anymore. But that does not mean it will turn its back on Pyongyang. Kim Hyun-bin has the latest on Beijing's stance against the regime.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi says that the newly adopted UN resolution on North Korea will not resolve the communist regime's problems. Speaking in front of reporters on Tuesday after China's annual meeting of its rubber stamp parliament, Wang also pointed out that as China and North Korea share bilateral and diplomatic ties, Beijing will help the regime if it seeks development and security. But Wang also clearly emphasized China's unwavering commitment to the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula, and that it will not accommodate the regime's nuclear and missile programs. The foreign ministry also expressed openness towards holding 3-way and 5-way talks, excluding North Korea, an idea that was proposed by South Korean President Park Geun-hye after Pyongyang's latest provocations. Wang has also been a supporter of restarting the 6-party denuclearization talks, which involves the U.S., China, Russia, Japan, and the 2 Koreas, which has been stalled since 2008. South Korea's foreign ministry, meanwhile, announced on Tuesday that it will be sending its newly appointed chief nuclear envoy, Kim Hong-kyun, to Washington. He will arrive there Thursday for a 3-day visit, which includes a meeting with his U.S. counterpart, Sung Kim. The two are expected to discuss a wide array of issues regarding North Korea, including handling and countering future provocations, and a way to bring about change in the communist regime. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
The start of Seoul and Washington's annual military exercises always garner an angry response from North Korea, but there's growing concerns inside and outside of Korea that this time, pressured by the toughest UN sanctions to date and the largest drills ever right on its doorstep, Pyongyang could lash out not just verbally, but physically as well. Kim Mo-kyun tells us more.
World governments have been expressing their concern over the uptick in tension between the 2 Koreas. South Korea and the United States have been closely monitoring for any unusual moves north of the border as they began their annual joint military drills dubbed Key Resolve and Foal Eagle on Monday. North Korea condemned the military exercises, calling them nuclear war moves, and threatened to respond with an all-out offensive. Issuing its response to Pyongyang's bluster, the United States urged North Korea to refrain from more provocative rhetoric and threats. U.S. State Department spokesman John Kirby on Monday reiterated that the drills are purely defensive in nature, and there was no reason for anybody to be angry about the exercises that have been held annually for the past 40 years. However, China says it's more concerned this time around, given the level of vocal opposition from North Korea.
North Korea has reacted strongly to the drills, so naturally we are concerned. We are closely linked to the Korean Peninsula, and in terms of its effects on the security situation, we are deeply opposed to any destabilizing actions in the area.
China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi urged North Korea to show restraint, reminding the regime that it was obliged to act within the boundaries of the latest UN Security Council resolution. Russia is calling for the U.S. and South Korea to show restraint. Moscow's foreign ministry said that despite the drills being held annually, it was only natural for North Korea to respond the way it did, given that they're on a much bigger scale this year, both in terms of troops and firepower. Kim Mo-kyan, Arirang News.
North Korea recently attempted many cyber-terrorism acts, mostly on smartphones of government officials. This comes after emergency security talks held as the threat of an even bigger cyber attacks from North Korea is becoming more pronounced, especially in the wake of the latest sanctions on the regime. Park Ji-won shares with us South Korea's intelligence agency's findings.
South Korea's National Intelligence Service has announced that North Korea tried to hack into the smartphones of dozens of key South Korean officials from late February to early March. It said the North was successful in about 1 in 5 attempts, with malware found on the infected devices that would give the North access to information on phone calls and text and voice messages. Pyongyang also attempted to steal the email addresses and passwords of railway employees using phishing emails during the months of January and February. The intelligence agency said North Korea also hacked into the networks of financial security software companies and public institutions. The details came out as the intelligence service held an emergency government-wide meeting on cyber-terrorism Tuesday morning. 14 government ministries and agencies took part in the meeting to discuss measures to counter such threats based on past experiences. The spy agency warned the ministries to be on the alert for additional cyber attacks from the North, as it believes Pyongyang could be preparing for a large-scale cyber attack on South Korea. North Korea was behind major cyber attacks on South Korea's banking system and television stations in 2011 and 2013. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
A UN committee has released a report condemning Japan's stance on the issue of its wartime military sex slavery. Tokyo has rejected the report, saying the UN has not given fair consideration to its point of view. Kwon Jang-ho has this report.
At a UN committee meeting last month, Japan's Deputy Foreign Minister Shinsuke Sugiyama denied his country's involvement in wartime sexual slavery.
The Japanese government conducted an investigation and found that the forceful taking away of women by the military and government authorities could not be confirmed in any document.
On Monday, the UN Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women released a report on the session that is critical of Sugiyama's statements. The report recommends that Japan's leaders and public officials stop making disparaging statements regarding their country's responsibility, which have the effect of re-traumatizing the victims. The committee also pushed Japan to further acknowledge its responsibility by integrating the issue into its textbooks to ensure that historical facts are objectively presented to students and the public at large. The Japanese government blasted the report on Tuesday, saying that Korea and Japan settled the issue in their landmark agreement reached in December.
It is really regrettable and unacceptable that the committee didn't take the Japanese government's explanation into full consideration and criticize the agreement between Japan and South Korea.
The South Korean government has so far avoided raising issue with Japan, following the stipulation in the December deal that the two nations would no longer criticize each other on the matter.
Fulfilling the December 28th agreement faithfully and sincerely is the most important thing. Through that, working to recover the honor and dignity of the victims and easing their emotional pain even one day sooner is what's important.
The victims and their families have already expressed their anger and frustration at the settlement, saying it is not enough, and that they want the Japanese government to take legal responsibility for its wartime atrocities. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye once again pointed to the service sector as a new growth engine for the future and the key to job creation. According to our Song Ji-sun, the president called for passage of related laws as soon as possible in order for the sector to fully realize its potential while countering the opposition's claims against the bill. Take a look.
Speaking with industry insiders on Tuesday, President Park said the service sector is the key to job creation and new growth, as it creates twice as many jobs as traditional manufacturing, with factory production and exports having limited room for growth in the future. To get things moving, she called for passage of a bill aimed at fostering the service sector, which has been pending at the National Assembly for over 4 years now.
이렇게 경제 활성화의 핵심적인 방법을 알면서도 손을 쓸 수 없는 현재의 상황이 안타깝습니다. 서비스법이 만들어지면 서비스 산업을 발전시킬 전략을 체계적으로 마련하고 집중 지원해서 다시 한번 우리 경제의 도약을 이끌 수 있습니다.
The government estimates up to 690,000 jobs could be created if the bill were passed, especially for young people seeking quality positions. President Park pointed to developed countries like the UK and the Netherlands that boast employment rates of over 70%, which was made possible because they shifted their focus to the service sector earlier on. She said the figure, which for Korea was at 66% as of 2015, will be impossible for Seoul to achieve without the expansion of the service sector. The government also rejects the opposition party's argument that the bill could spur privatization of the healthcare sector, saying that is not an intended part of the bill, nor is the bill meant to disrupt the public nature of the healthcare industry. 송지선, Arirang News.
Korea's household debt-to-GDP ratio has been the highest among some emerging economies for 13 straight years now, at 87.2% of GDP in the third quarter of last year. It's the highest among 17 countries surveyed, according to the Bank for International Settlements. Thailand was a distant second with a ratio of slightly over 70%. Among 41 countries, including advanced economies, Korea's household debt-to-GDP ratio was the 8th highest. Switzerland topped the list with some 120%, followed by Denmark and the Netherlands. The central banks of such European countries have adopted a negative interest rate strategy in a bid to reinvigorate their economies. The most highly anticipated tournament pitting man against machine is only a day away, and the main players involved in the Baduk or Ko match are gearing up or loading up in Seoul. Alphabet Inc. Chairman Eric Schmidt's Demis Hassabis, the CEO of DeepMind Technologies and developer of AlphaGo, and Korea's Lee Se-dol, the reigning human grandmaster of the game, all appeared at a press conference on Tuesday in Seoul. Schmidt said regardless of the result, the winner of the match is humanity, because artificial intelligence will make each and every person smarter and better. Hassabis said he had not hit the ceiling of AlphaGo limits, so he is here to test it out. Lee Se-dol thanked the team for giving him the opportunity to become a part of this match that he said will be a historical event for both Ko and AI. That wraps up the newscast for this hour. Thank you for watching.